It started with a power outage. Just a flicker in the early hours of June 5, 2021. Nothing unusual for Mill Creek, a small mountain town. In the morning, 22 people disappeared. Not from one place, not from one group, but scattered all. Across town, a baker never opened her shop. A high school senior never made it to her final exam. A father of two left for his morning jog and never came home. No breakings, no signs of struggle. In most cases, their doors were locked from the inside, phones untouched, cars still parked, pets left behind, confused but unharmed. What baffled the town most was how clean it all was, like they were plucked right out of their lives in the middle of a routine moment. The police tried to find a pattern. Age, gender, job, background, none of it lined up. And as the investigation dragged on with no answers, more questions began to surface. Why did all the disappearances happen between 4 o'clock and 4:20 a.m.? Why were there strange humming sounds reported that night, but only near the north side of town? And why, even now, does no one in Mill Creek talk about what happened without first checking over their shoulder? Welcome back to Storiosity's videos. It was exactly 4:03 a.m. when the lights blinked across Mill Creek. Just a second, maybe less. A quick flicker, like the kind you'd barely notice unless you were awake. Most weren't, but for the few who were, a nurse on a late shift, a baker prepping dough, a teenager mindlessly scrolling through her phone, the moment was strange. The lights dimmed, the house gave off a low mechanical hum, and then everything snapped back to normal. No thunder, no wind, just quiet. In fact, that's what people would later say stuck with them most, the strange, pressing silence that followed. Not the silence of a sleeping town, but a deeper kind, like everything outside had paused. The power came back almost instantly. Phones kept charging, clocks didn't even reset, but something had changed. At 6:12 a.m., the first call came into the police station. A woman on Maple Street said her husband never came back from his morning run. His phone and wallet were still on the kitchen table. The door was locked. The front mat was undisturbed. An hour later, a teacher failed to show up for the summer workshop she'd helped organize, something she never would have missed. Then came the report of a missing teenage girl from Willow Creek Drive. Her room was untouched. Bed made, backpack by the door. Her phone, strangely, had a half-written message on the lock screen that read, "Did you hear that and then nothing?" By 9:30 a.m., the local police had more than a dozen missing persons reports, all filed by confused, increasingly panicked residents. Sheriff Hal Whitmer, a no-nonsense man with 30 years on the job, had never seen anything like it. Not even during the snowstorm of '97, when the town was cut off for 3 days. People don't just disappear, he told reporters later. Especially not in groups, and not overnight. But it was clear this wasn't just a case of a few teenagers skipping town or someone skipping a court date. The missing included a dentist, a retired librarian, a college freshman, and a sick boy. No links, no common locations, no shared pasts. They just vanished. The more the police tried to connect the dots, the more confusing it became. It was like trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have all the pieces, or maybe the pieces didn't belong to the same puzzle at all. That night, the town held its breath. Parents double-locked doors, porch lights stayed on. People who hadn't prayed in years sat silently by their beds. No one said it aloud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. If 22 people could disappear without a trace, then who would be next? Rumors started fast: abductions, gas leaks, sleepwalking cults, even alien theories. Most of it sounded ridiculous, but when you have no answers, your mind fills the silence with whatever it can. Sheriff Whitmer ordered round-the-clock patrols and asked residents to stay indoors between 3 a.m. and sunrise. The flicker had been the first warning. Whatever happened next, ... No one wanted to be awake to see it. By the next morning, the number of missing had climbed to 22. That was the final count. No more calls, no more disappearances, at least not yet. But for a town of barely 4,000, that number was terrifying. Nearly everyone in Mill Creek either knew someone who was gone, or knew someone who did. The local high school cancelled its summer classes. The diner, which normally opened at 7 on the dot, stayed dark. Church bells didn't ring that Sunday. People moved differently, slower, quieter, unsure if whatever had swept through the town might come back. Most of the houses where the missing had lived were undisturbed. Nothing stolen, no signs of forced entry. And here's what really spooked the officers. In over half the cases, the front doors were still locked from the inside. Detective Claire Mendel, who had transferred to Mill Creek from Denver just 6 months earlier, noticed it first, at the Lambert residence, where 15-year-old Casey had vanished. The kitchen light was on, her breakfast half-eaten. Her tablet sat open on the counter, playing music, the same song, on loop, for over 2 hours before her mum came down and realized something was wrong. Claire checked the smart home system. According to the log, the front door hadn't opened. All night, not once. It doesn't make sense, she told Hal Whitmer in a hushed voice. She didn't leave through that door, and there are no other exits. Hal didn't answer. He just stared at the report in his hand from a house on the other side of town where the exact same thing had happened as news of the missing spread beyond Mill Creek. Outside investigators began to take interest. The state police sent a liaison, and by Monday, FBI agents arrived. Not to take over yet, but to observe. The media, too, had caught wind. Reporters hovered near the town's main road, blocked by hastily set-up barricades. The mayor, Sandra Ellison, made a brief public statement. "We are working with all the appropriate agencies to understand what happened. Our focus is on finding our people and keeping this community safe." But the truth was, they had nothing. No video footage showed anything strange. No phones pinged towers outside of Mill Creek. Not even a single tire track out of place. It was as if the missing hadn't walked away but been removed. By Tuesday, the mood in town had shifted again. Not from panic, but from something worse, stillness. A quiet, uneasy acceptance that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Dogs barked in patterns. Lights flickered in synchronized bursts on random streets. And there was a new rumor. Several people, unrelated to one another, claimed they had strange dreams the night before the disappearances. Vivid ones. Some saw fog swallowing their homes. Others heard a low humming in their sleep. But the detail that chilled Claire the most was this. In 3 separate dreams, the people said they saw a figure, tall, blurred, standing by their window. Watching, just watching, until the lights flickered and it was gone. Detective Claire Mendel had a habit she learned in Denver: always make a map. So by Wednesday morning, her office wall was covered with a full layout of Mill Creek, hand-pinned with red and yellow markers. Red for where the disappearances happened, yellow for the last confirmed sightings. The map was crowded. 22 red pins, scattered across the town like random drops of rain. But when Claire stepped back to look again, something shifted, not in the map, in her perception of it. The pins weren't as random as they first seemed. There was a loose curve to them, a kind of arc. She traced it lightly with a pen, then checked the digital satellite map. The curve matched something real, the outer edge of what used to be the Mill Creek. Railway line decommissioned in 1978, overgrown, forgotten. She brought the theory to Sheriff Whitmer and FBI liaison agent Brooks that afternoon. "I think they were taken in a path," she said, pointing to the pins. "Not all at once, not randomly, like something moved through the town." Brooks frowned, unconvinced. "So what? A train ghost?" Claire didn't smile. "No, but maybe something followed the old track. Something with a reason to move, in a curve, in a route. That's how you take 22 people without anyone noticing. You don't hit them all at once. You move, quiet, quick." Whitmer leaned in, brow furrowed. "And what exactly is moving, Claire?" She didn't answer, because, deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Meanwhile, the town kept spiraling into unease. At the high school, students began trading stories of odd dreams and strange echoes in the gym. A small group of parents had started keeping their kids home, not out of protest, but fear. In Town Square, someone had scrawled "We're next" on the side of a bus shelter. It was quickly painted over, but everyone saw it, and no one argued. What haunted them most wasn't just the disappearances, it was the quietness of it. How clean it all had been. No alarms, no noise, no chance to say goodbye. Reverend Lyle at Mill Creek Chapel opened the building for nightly vigils. Not that many came. Those who did often just sat, staring into the dark corners of the room as if hoping for answers to appear in the silence. None ever did, that night. Around 3:50 a.m., the lights flickered again. Not everywhere this time, just on the west side of town. It lasted 2 full seconds, long enough for coffee machines to stop, fans to stall, and people to look up from their beds. Claire was already awake, poring over case files when her office light blinked once, then dimmed. She stood perfectly still, eyes on the window. For a moment, she thought she heard it, a low hum, like the faint engine of something large and slow moving through the air. Then silence. Again, the same kind that had blanketed Again, the same kind that had blanketed Mill Creek 5 days earlier, thick, unnatural, almost alive. And for the first time, Claire felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the case began. Not fear, not yet, but expectation, like whatever had come once might be preparing to return the next morning. Reports started coming in from the northern edge of town, just past the old water tower and the forgotten train crossing. Several residents claimed their floors vibrated. Around 4 a.m., not violently, just enough to make glasses rattle and pets whine. One man, Everett Phelps, a retired mechanic, swore he'd seen dirt rise off his driveway like a breath was being exhaled from the earth. At first, no one took him seriously, until Claire Mendel visited his property and noticed something strange. In a straight line across his gravel driveway, the rocks had separated slightly, like something had passed underneath, barely shifting the soil above it. It was narrow and faint, but ran in the same curve as the old railway track Claire had mapped days earlier. Claire crouched and touched the soil. It was still warm. The morning air was chilly, and the shade had covered the spots in sunrise. She took soil samples, bagged them, and marked the line with flags. Later, a local geologist brought in by the county police examined the path and could only shrug. It's not from a pipe or animal, he said. It's too uniform. Something wide, shallow, not natural. That same night, a second line was found across the backyard of the Parker family, whose teenage daughter Emily had vanished the previous week. The grass in the path was flattened, but only slightly, and shimmered oddly under flashlight. Claire ran her fingers over it and pulled back quickly. The grass was warm, too, warmer than the air around it. Back at the sheriff's office, Agent Brooks finally admitted something out loud that no one else had wanted to. "We're not just missing people," he said. "We're chasing something physical. It's moving through this town like it knows exactly where it's going." Whitmer nodded, jaw tight. "Then we need to get ahead of it." "But how do you get ahead of something when you don't even know what it is?" They ran motion sensor cameras across a half-mile stretch of the old railway curve hidden in trees, angled toward the ground. They installed seismic monitors from the state lab, and they waited. But nothing came that night. No flicker, no tremor, no hum. Just the empty, quiet Mill Creek was starting to get used to, almost like whatever had passed through was resting or watching. Meanwhile, Claire kept noticing small, unnerving details in her investigation. The cell phones of the missing all, last pinged within a 2-minute window between 4:11 and 4:13 a.m., and each one had been connected to Wi-Fi moments before losing signal. But in 4 different cases, the Wi-Fi networks they were connected to weren't real. Claire had tech analysts verify it. The networks weren't registered to any local address. They had names like home_47x or network_unknown, but no physical routers, no origin points. It was as if something had created fake signals just long enough to pull the victims offline, cut them from trace. "That's not just a ghost signal," the analyst said over the phone. "That's engineered. Someone or something built those to go dark." Claire stared at her board of red pins again. Her gut whispered what her brain wasn't ready to accept. This wasn't random. This was planned. On Thursday afternoon, while Claire Mendel was reviewing the silent footage from the tree-mounted cameras, she received a call from a man named Henry Locke. He said he was the property manager of the North Mill storage units, located just 2 streets from where the last line of disturbed ground had been found. His voice was calm but careful, like he was weighing every word. "Something strange happened here," he said, "and I think someone should take a look." Claire drove over within the hour. The facility was modest, 40 or so units, most rarely visited. Henry led her to unit number 16. "Belonged to a man named Elias Dorr," he said. "Never missed a payment. But he stopped coming around, ... years ago. Then 3 nights ago, the motion sensor picked something up in here. No one's been inside since the unit smelled faintly of earth and metal. Old shelving lined the walls, with yellowed documents, dusty tools, and several large metal trunks. One was open. Inside, Claire found journals, dozens of them, dated between 1994 and 2007. She flipped through a few and felt her stomach knot. Nearly every entry was filled with obsessive, detailed notes about the hum beneath Mill Creek, descriptions of underground vibrations, mentions of flickering lights, and a term that came up again and again: the conductor. Claire read aloud one chilling line dated March 9th, 1999. "They only take those who can hear it. The others are just asleep. But once you hear the hum, you belong to it." As Claire dug deeper into the journals, she began to see the same pattern of dreams that current residents were now reporting. Elias Dorr had written about hearing whispers in the walls, a mechanical rhythm in the night, and an overwhelming feeling that something was moving under the streets. He believed there were paths underneath Mill Creek, ancient and unused, but not abandoned. In one sketch, he had drawn the town from above, mapping a curve nearly identical to Claire's own. Findings: the old rail line again. Only Elias didn't call it that. He labeled it the outer track where entry begins. In another trunk, she found an old tape recorder. She clicked play, static, then, faintly, a hum, low, steady, vibrating deep enough to give her a chill. No voices, just that sound. Claire took everything, every notebook, every tape. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. Henry only watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, face pale. "I always thought Elias was a little off," he said quietly. He'd rant about signals and ground movement. Most people thought he was some kind of prep. Claire turned to him. "Where is he now?" Henry shook his head. "No one knows. He stopped coming around 15 years ago. Left his key on the desk one day. Said, 'It's coming again. I'm getting out before it picks me.'" Claire froze. He said that. Henry nodded, and then he disappeared, just like the others. Only nobody noticed, because back then it was just one person. Claire looked down at the notebooks in her arms. Maybe Elias hadn't been paranoid. Maybe he'd been first. Claire didn't sleep that night. She spread Elias Dawes' journals across her kitchen table, organizing them by year. The earlier entries were scattered observations, odd noises at night, unexplained power surges, and a strange clicking sound that he claimed only appeared during the last week of each month. But as the years passed, the entries grew more focused, obsessive. Elias had developed a theory that Mill Creek sat on top of something old, something designed to move in patterns. He called it the root under the skin. At first, Claire had thought he was referring to old sewer lines or the long-buried railway tunnels. But his diagrams didn't line up with any existing infrastructure. They curved in perfect arcs, always beginning and ending in the outskirts of town, never intersecting the same place twice. What disturbed her most wasn't just the theory, but how closely it matched what was happening now. In a 2004 entry, Elias wrote, "When the lights flicker, the ground listens. And when the ground listens, people go quiet." Claire sat back, the words sinking deep. He hadn't just predicted patterns, he'd predicted silence. And now 22 people had vanished in a single night without a single scream, call, or cry for help. She rewound the old tape recorder again and listened to the hum. This time, she noticed something underneath it. Not a voice, not quite. More like a rhythm, mechanical, repeating every 6.7 seconds, with a metallic clang at the end of each cycle. She played it 10 times. It never changed. She took the recorder to the sheriff's office first thing the next morning. Whitmer didn't say a word as the sound filled his office. He only nodded slowly. "It's like a train," he finally whispered. Claire had thought the same thing, that repetitive echo, the way it looped. But Elias never called it a train. He always referred to it as the conductor. In one 2006 entry, he described waking at 4:12 a.m. with blood coming from his ears and the sound of wheels turning beneath his floor. Claire had checked the hospital record he had gone in that day. Burst eardrum, no known cause. Whitmer finally looked up. "What do we do with this?" Claire shook her head. "I don't think we're supposed to do anything. I think this thing is following a plan, a cycle. and we're already in it. That same day, they discovered another strange event. 3 houses, spread across different blocks, had their security systems triggered at exactly 4:11 a.m., same time stamp. All 3 homes belonged to people who were still present in town, not among the missing. But here's where it got weirder. The systems didn't show intrusions. They showed ... entries. Doors opening without unlocking. Motion sensors tripping in empty rooms. One camera from the Morris home caught a flicker of something, not a person, not clearly. Just a shimmer, a bend in the light moving past the hallway. The footage froze at frame 112, and then the file corrupted. Just that one part. No data before or after. Claire stared at the screen, pulse steady but high. Ilias's words came back again. It doesn't take everyone, just the ones who hear it. Claire Mendel hadn't believed in premonitions until she met Mill Creek. But now, she kept waking at the same moment every night, 4:03 a.m. No sound, no movement, just a pressure in the room, like the air was aware of her. She began sleeping with a notebook on her nightstand, jotting down fragments of dreams, a tunnel with no walls, a metal door turning in slow motion, the sensation of standing still while the world beneath her slid forward. On Friday morning, she received a message from someone unexpected. June Holloway, a school counselor from Mill Creek High. June had heard whispers from her students. One by one, certain teens, not all, reported the same thing. A vibrating sound behind the walls at night. Some even said they'd felt it through their pillows. Claire met June that afternoon in her office at the school. The counselor had compiled a list of 14 students, all unrelated, who'd reported these sensations since early June. It's not mass hysteria, June said. They didn't talk to each other about it. I pulled this together myself. Over weeks, there's something connecting them. Claire looked through the names and noticed something alarming. 3 of them were siblings of the missing. 2 more lived next door to houses where disappearances had occurred. Another, Alyssa Marino, was the younger cousin of one of the vanished teens. These weren't random students. They were connected by proximity, by touch, as if whatever had passed through Mill Creek hadn't taken them ... yet. That night, Claire stood alone on what remained of the old railway bridge near the west end of town. It had been decommissioned long ago, and most of the wooden slats had rotted. But the metal frame still stood strong, and under it, the earth was cracked in a long, uneven line. She lowered a ground sensor she'd borrowed from the geological team. Nothing happened for 3 minutes. Then the sensor jumped. A spike, small but clear, at 4:11 a.m. on the dot. Claire stared into the empty forest beyond and whispered to herself, "It's still moving." The radio on her belt crackled. It was Whitmer. "Claire, we've got something at the high school. You better come now." She arrived to find 2 janitors standing outside the school, visibly shaken. "We heard it," one of them said, pointing at the building. "In the gym, like something walking. Heavy, too heavy to be human." The gym was empty, of course, but Claire noticed something immediately. One of the basketballs had rolled from the equipment cage all the way to midcourt. It came to a stop, dead center. As if placed there, she crouched beside it and touched the floor. Still warm. Again, always warm, where it shouldn't be. Whitmer said nothing, just scanned the shadows. On her way out, Claire passed a bulletin board filled with school event flyers, but one page stood out. A handwritten note pinned between announcements. "When the lights flicker, stay still. When the hum begins, Do not answer. If you see him, look away. The next morning, maintenance workers at Pine Hollow Elementary School made a strange discovery. The playground mulch near the back corner of the field had caved in, slightly, not enough to alarm children, but enough for one of the workers to notice the ground wasn't settling like normal soil. It dipped inward, like something had pressed upward from below. The school had been closed since the disappearances, mostly from parental fear, not orders, so the area had remained untouched. When the sheriff's department was notified, Claire and Whitmer arrived within the hour. Claire crouched at the edge of the depression, hands on her knees. The shape was perfectly round, about 5 feet across, a shallow dent. She pressed a foot gently into the center. It gave slightly, like a weak spot in old wood. They decided to dig. Not with machines, they didn't want to damage anything beneath, but carefully, by hand and with small tools. After an hour, they struck. Metal, not pipe, not concrete, something smoother, polished, artificial. Claire cleared the dirt and revealed what looked like a panel, half buried and curved, a strange, metallic hue that seemed to shift under sunlight. No seams, no screws, no identifying marks, just a cold, silver surface that shouldn't be there. They scanned it for heat. It was warm, just like the basketball court floor, just like the soil near Everett Phelps' house. What is it? One of the deputies asked. Claire didn't answer. Her hand hovered over it. The surface felt ... wrong. Too clean for something that had supposedly been buried for decades. Whitmer radioed for the state geologists. While they waited, Claire went back to her map. The playground sat directly on the old rail curve. More than that, it aligned almost exactly with the last recorded hum vibration from her seismic equipment. She dug back into Elias Dawes' journals and found one chilling entry. There's an entry near the children's field. It was one of the first to move. It watches now. It remembers them. She had no idea what that meant, but her gut twisted when she reread the phrase. It watches now. What could possibly watch from underground? And how could Elias have known about a vibration path that no one had measured until days ago? By evening, a perimeter was set up around the site, though no one said exactly what they were protecting. The story was vague ground instability, a safety precaution, but rumors spread fast in Mill Creek. Some residents showed up, peering through the trees. One elderly woman, Vera Langley, sat in a folding chair just outside the caution tape for hours. Claire eventually approached her. Vera didn't blink, just stared at the site. My brother disappeared in 1973, she said, without being prompted. 12 years old. We were at a picnic here. He went to throw something in the woods, ... Never came back. Claire knelt beside her. What did they say happened? Vera finally looked at her. They told us he wandered off. Got lost, but the lights flickered that day too. Just once, I remember, because the car radio shut off. And when it came back, it wasn't playing the same station anymore. Claire couldn't shake Vera Langley's story, a child disappearing from the same spot nearly 50 years ago. Same flickering, same strange silence. If it was true and it felt too detailed to dismiss, then Mill Creek's mystery hadn't started last week. It had simply restarted. That meant Elias Dawes hadn't been the first. Just the first to write it down. Claire returned to the town archives that afternoon, requesting any records on missing persons between 1960 and 1980. The clerk, a nervous young woman named Abby, hesitated. We lost a lot of records in the basement flood of '82, she said, but I think there's a box they never refiled. She led Claire to a narrow back room filled with unlabeled banker boxes. They found it on the third shelf. Missing persons unsolved inside were faded reports, hand-typed on brittle pages, and half-stamped photos clipped to corners. Names Claire had never heard. Martin Langley, Vera's brother, listed in 1973. Then, a girl named Beth Compton in 1968. A factory worker in 71. Always alone. Always vanished without a trace. The similarities jumped out immediately. Each report mentioned odd circumstances. Shoes left behind in perfect condition. Meals untouched on tables. Dogs barking just before the disappearances. One deputy had even scribbled a note in the margin of the Langley file. Radio lost signal for 2 minutes. Returned, playing backwards. Claire blinked. Backwards. That wasn't something that could be explained with power surges or coincidence. She brought the documents back to the sheriff's office and laid them out for Whitmer and Agent Brooks. "This has happened before," she said, voice low but firm. "Maybe not 22 people at once, but consistently, every few years, and always around this part of town, always in summer, always at night." Brooks frowned as he flipped through the pages. "So why now? Why so many?" Claire shook her head. "I don't know. But maybe someone saw it building, and we just didn't listen." Whitmer leaned over and pointed to a date, June 5th, 1968. Same day. That's 53 years to the day of our event. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "A cycle." Claire nodded. "A long one. Maybe we never noticed before because it moved. Slow enough that no one connected the dots. But now it's speeding up." As they talked, another call came in, this time from a man named Jeff Hollow, who lived in the house just west of the old track bend. He claimed something had risen in his backyard. Not someone, something. Claire drove over immediately. Jeff stood at the edge of his lawn, staring at the middle of the yard where the grass had split open. Not from digging or natural sinkage, but as if something had pushed its way to the surface. In the exposed earth sat a narrow strip of metal, identical to what they'd found beneath the school playground. Only this piece hummed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Claire crouched to examine it, but Jeff grabbed her arm. "I've been hearing it in my walls for weeks," he whispered, "and last night my clocks stopped. Every one at 4:11. Claire didn't sleep again. The humming from Jeff Hollow's yard hadn't stopped. It was faint, almost imperceptible. But once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. She recorded the sound using her field mic and brought the audio file to the tech lab downtown. The way analysis showed something she hadn't expected. The hum wasn't one solid tone. It was layered, like a chord made of overlapping signals. And at regular intervals, every 67 seconds, a smaller pulse spiked just beneath the surface. Like a coded heartbeat, the analyst said. "It's not random. It's transmitting something." Claire pressed him. "Could it be a signal? Data?" He shrugged. "Not in any language or format I've seen, but someone smarter than me might know." She copied the files and took them to Agent Brooks, who promised to escalate it to the Federal Cyber Unit. That evening, the humming line in Jeff's backyard had grown stretched by 2 feet. The metal wasn't expanding, but more of it had surfaced, as if rising, and the weirdest part, no dirt had been pushed aside. The ground simply separated cleanly, and the metal emerged like it had always been there. "Something's moving." "Under us," Claire said aloud as she walked the property perimeter. "Not tunneling, gliding, Whitmer, who had joined her, stood quietly. It's like a buried machine. That's when Claire said it for the first time. Not buried, built. If this was a system and not a natural formation, then Mill Creek wasn't just unlucky. It had been constructed on top of something older, something possibly still functioning. Meanwhile, Elias Dawes' tapes were being digitized. Another one, previously overlooked, contained a full hour of spoken notes. Elias's voice was clear, urgent. Every cycle is faster, he said. Every time it comes back, it needs more. Not just people, locations. It moves through them like it's charging. The lights, the power, ... It's using them, he mentioned. Something called the entry window, which he defined as a 3-day period of synchronized flickers, ground hums, and signal interference. Claire froze. They were on day 2. According to Elias, if something wasn't done before the 3rd night, the system would complete its loop. And when the loop closes, Elias said on the tape, those who are taken won't be brought back. Not because they're lost, because they're used. That night, Claire made a decision she knew Whitmer wouldn't like. She went back to the school playground, waited until the patrol left, and stepped over the barrier. With a flashlight, she moved to the metal panel. It had shifted slightly, risen another inch, with a faint crack appearing near one edge. She tapped it with her flashlight handle. Hollow. Then she knelt and placed her ear to it. For a few seconds, nothing. Then, clear as breath, came a distant mechanical sound. A rotating click. A drag. A stop. Then again, like something far below was turning in intervals. And faintly, almost missed under the rhythm, a voice. Not a whisper, not a scream, just a word. Repeated once, twice. Claire. Claire pulled away from the metal panel like it burned her. She staggered back, heart pounding, flashlight beam, shaking over the disturbed ground. The voice hadn't been loud. It hadn't been clear. But it said her name not once, but twice, with the mechanical calm of something repeating what it had already said before. She stared at the panel, half expecting it to shift again, to open. It didn't. The hum was gone, replaced by silence even thicker than the night air. But now she knew whatever was below wasn't dormant. It was listening, and it had learned her name. She backed away slowly, making sure not to touch the surface again. As she left, the flashlight flickered once in her hand. Then again, at exactly 4:11 a.m. Back at the sheriff's office, she worked in silence, piecing together the paths of every disappearance, the locations, the timestamps, and then she did something new. She overlaid a grid on her digital map and entered the GPS coordinates of each incident. At first, it looked like chaos. Then she adjusted for elevation, and a strange formation appeared. Not a circle, not a line. A spiral, widening outward from a central point just beyond the old lumber mill. The spiral was broken in places, incomplete, but unmistakably artificial in design. It's not picking at random, Claire murmured. It's following this pattern, it's scanning. The red pins weren't just markers of where people vanished. They were part of something larger. Something SYSTEMIZED. As if it were working its way outward from a core. She brought the map to Whitmer and Brooks. Brooks leaned over the spiral, his brow furrowed. This could be a power network, he said. A grid, you said, Elias believed. It was taking energy. Claire nodded. People, places, electricity. It all ties into these points. Whitmer pointed at the center. That mill was shut down in 1981. After that, half the town's industry left. But it still has underground, storage and a substation built before records went digital. Brooks picked up the phone. "We need to get in there." Claire didn't disagree, but a deeper worry had begun to form. If the spiral was a circuit, something charging, then what happened when it was complete? If this thing, this system, had already taken 22 people, how many more would it need? As they made plans to enter the mill, news broke of a new event. A boy from the Holloway household had gone missing. 15 years old. Left his bed at night, last seen at 3:58 a.m., heading toward the woods behind his house. His younger sister had woken just in time to see him open the back door, glassy-eyed, silent. She followed him for 6 steps, then stopped, afraid. "He didn't look at me," she told Claire later. "He didn't even look alive. By sunrise, he was gone. No tracks, no heat signature, nothing. Just a single deep indent in the soil by the tree line, right where the spiral's curve passed through." That May 23, Claire looked back at the map on the wall. The pattern was moving faster now, closing in. The next morning, Claire, Whitmer, and Agent Brooks approached the remains of the old lumber mill with caution. It sat at the edge of the dense woods, crumbling and forgotten, covered in ivy and years of rot. Most of the mill was boarded shut, but Whitmer knew a back entrance through a partially collapsed supply shed. "I came here as a kid," he muttered. "Didn't even know there was a substation underneath." They stepped through the broken door, flashlights flicking across rusted pipes and hanging cables. The air inside was thick with dust and mold, but also something else. A tension, a stillness that didn't feel natural. They found the entrance to the underground level behind. A rusted storage locker, a narrow staircase leading into black. The staircase creaked with every step as they descended into the dark, air thinning with each breath. At the bottom, they found what looked like a substation control room, or what was left of one. Half the equipment had been stripped decades ago. The rest was eerily intact, including a wall of analog panels glowing faintly despite no visible power source. "This place shouldn't have power," Brooks said quietly. Claire ran her hand over one of the panels. It pulsed under her fingers, warm, rhythmic. She turned to the far wall, where a steel hatch sat recessed into the concrete. No handles, just an embedded panel beside it, marked with a faint, circular symbol. Claire froze. It matched a sketch in Elias Dawes' journals, the seal. They didn't try to open the hatch, not yet. Instead, Claire approached a small work table beside it, cluttered with weathered notebooks and blueprints. She flipped through them quickly, all marked with a symbol she'd now seen several times, a triangle within a spiral. One blueprint showed the town grid, overlaid with a branching system of tunnels, most never recorded in any official plan, and at the center, the very room they now stood in, labeled Primary Intake Point. Brooks read aloud from one yellowed page: "Extraction pattern complete. Awaiting final sequence. Organic triggers in place. Signal stable. Entry confirmed." Claire turned to him. "This isn't just a station. This is a control node." Whitmer's radio crackled, suddenly a burst of static, followed by a low, familiar hum. For 11 p.m., the ground beneath them rumbled, softly at first, then sharper like something rotating beneath the concrete. Dust rained from the ceiling. The hatch pulsed once with a dull light. Then again, they all stepped back. The hum deepened, not louder but more layered, like it was stacking on top of itself. Then silence. Claire stepped forward again and placed her hand flat on the hatch. It vibrated against her palm. She didn't hear her name this time, but something worse. A soft tapping, from the other side. Whitmer pulled her back. "We need to leave. Now." But Claire didn't move. She stared at the hatch and whispered, "It's not done." That night, she stood alone in her kitchen, replaying the tap in her head. She listened to Elias Dawes' tapes again. In the very last recording, one they'd previously thought was just static, she heard something else. Slowed down and filtered, there was a single line buried beneath the noise. "When it opens, it won't close again. Not until it's full." She looked back at the new coordinates from the boy's disappearance. They aligned with the arc of the spiral. There was only one point left unmarked, one curve incomplete. Claire pressed a thumbtack into the spot on the map, her hand shaking slightly. Then she realized something, that last spot. It was her own house. Claire didn't sleep, not that night. Not with the final pin on her map pointing directly to her. Her own home, her own bed, the supposed end of the spiral. She sat in the living room with every light on, her gun within reach. Not out of fear, but because it gave her hands something to hold. Every creak in the walls, every shift in the wind outside made her skin tighten. She checked the clock constantly. Las 3:48. Las 3:57. 4:03. Time slowed. The minute her watch hit 4:11, every light in the house flickered once. The fridge clicked off. The fan stopped. And for a brief, dreadful second, all she could hear was her own breath. Then the hum, faint, like it was beneath her floorboards, circling up through the pipes. She stood slowly, listening. The house felt ... thinner, like the walls were stretching. The hallway lights buzzed and dimmed. She moved toward the kitchen, passing the framed photographs of her childhood, and noticed one had changed. The photo of her and her brother as kids, standing in their old backyard. But now, something was in the background. A figure, blurred, tall, shadowed, watching from the tree line. Claire froze. She opened the back door and stepped outside. The night air was completely still, but the grass at the edge of the yard was pressed down, freshly disturbed. Another line had formed, shallow and smooth, running straight to her back. Porch GOT. She followed the line with a flashlight, which began flickering as soon as she stepped into the lawn. The soil beneath her feet felt soft, like it had just been turned. The hum grew stronger the farther she walked, not in volume, but in density. She felt it in her spine, her teeth. The flashlight gave out entirely just as she reached the midpoint of her yard. Claire stood in the dark, her ears ringing. And then, just as the clock ticked for 12, she heard it again. Her name, once. No direction, just presence. It didn't sound threatening, it sounded familiar. Like a memory. She spun around. Nothing. But when she turned her gaze downward, she saw a glimmer. Another metal segment was pushing up through the dirt, just inches from her feet. She backed away slowly, heart hammering. This wasn't just happening to Mill Creek anymore. It was personal, purposeful. Whatever the system was, whatever was operating beneath them, it had chosen her for something. She ran inside, locked the doors, and pulled every curtain closed. By sunrise, she had already packed 2 bags and copied every file she had onto 3 different drives. She wasn't leaving Mill Creek, not yet, but she needed a plan. The spiral had ended at her house, yes. But what if that wasn't the end of the pattern, just the end of this cycle? Claire called Whitmer. "Meet me at the town records building," she said. "I think there's a blueprint we missed." Her voice was steady, but her hand shook as she held the phone. Because deep down, She knew what the voice had really meant. Your next dot. Claire and Sheriff Whitmer met at the Mill Creek Records building just after sunrise. The building hadn't been updated in decades, and its aging foundation smelled faintly of paper, mildew, and dust. Abby, the young clerk from earlier, met them at the door with a nervous expression. You said you wanted the original town blueprints. Claire nodded. Not the online scans. The original layouts before modern zoning. Abby hesitated, then led them down a narrow stairwell to the basement archives. Most of it's untouched, she said, unlocking a door. You're looking at records from the 1930s to early 50s, back when they were still laying cable and digging the utility trenches. Inside, the room was lined wall to wall with rolled blueprints in stacked bins, some half-decayed. They searched for over an hour before Whitmer finally unrolled a long, yellowing blueprint labeled Mill Creek, Infrastructure and Power Grid, Plan 1938. Claire cleared a table and rolled it flat, placing weights at the corners. What they saw made her breath catch. The town wasn't just laid out for convenience, it had been designed. Roads followed curves, not straight lines. The main neighborhoods bent gently toward a central axis. When overlaid with her current map, it matched the spiral pattern almost perfectly. Claire traced a finger across the old lines. They built the town on top of it, she said. This was intentional. Whitmer stared. But what is it? Claire pointed to the legend. There were markings labeled primary wells, energy transfer junctions, and something else. Core nodes, 5 in total, one of which sat directly beneath. The old lumber mill, the other 4 aligned with every location where the deepest hums had been recorded over the past week. These aren't just missing person sites, Claire whispered. Their activation points. Brooks, who had arrived, minutes later, listened in silence. We're standing on top of a circuit, he muttered, and it's turning on again. Claire nodded. This spiral, it's not just a path, it's a key, a timed sequence. Something below is cycling, charging. It's using us, the people, the structures, as part of a living grid. Suddenly, Abby gasped. She had picked up a companion document, a surveyor's report stapled to the back of the blueprint. Scribbled in red pen were notes from 1951. One line stood out. Construction. Halted. Tunnel breach detected. Project declared, sealed. Entry dangerous. System response unpredictable. It was signed by an engineer named Lawrence Dorr. Claire's stomach dropped. Ilias's father, she whispered. He must have been one of the original planners. It all connected. Elias hadn't been guessing, he'd grown up with this knowledge. The journals weren't speculation, they were warnings. Passed down, buried, then ignored. Whitmer straightened. So what do we do? Now, Claire stared at the blueprint. We go to the last node, the only one that hasn't activated yet. That final node sat beneath a long-forgotten structure, an abandoned storm-drained tunnel on the far northern ridge, outside town limits. If the sequence continued, if the spiral was truly charging towards something, that's where it would end. Or begin. Either way, they had no choice. They gathered the prints, sealed the map, and left the records room. As Claire stepped into daylight, she felt the sun for the first time that week. It felt ... wrong. Too warm for the hour. The air around her was humming, low and steady. She didn't look at her watch. She already knew what time it was. 4:11. Claire stood on the ridge overlooking the northern edge of Mill Creek as clouds gathered low and heavy in the sky. Ahead of her lay the forgotten storm tunnel, obscured by brush, warped by time, and long since removed from local maps. Only the blueprints proved it was ever here. The entrance was a jagged opening carved into the slope, lined in crumbling concrete, and swallowed by shadow. Whitmer, Brooks, and 2 deputies stood behind her. No one spoke. Even the wind had died. As Claire stepped closer, she heard it again, not the hum this time, but something worse. Breath. Not human. Rhythmic. Deep. The tunnel was exhaling. They entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the dark. The tunnel sloped downward, slowly at first, then sharply. The walls were marked with old service numbers, most worn away, but the deeper they went, the newer things looked. Halfway down, they passed through a curve in the tunnel where the walls turned from cracked concrete to smooth, seamless alloy. Whitmer ran a hand across the metal. "This wasn't built by anyone in this county," he said quietly. Claire nodded. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't aging. It looked ... alive. The pulsing underfoot became steady, like standing above a generator the size of a building. "We're inside the grid," Claire said. "It's responding to us." After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, spherical, smooth, and eerily symmetrical. And in the center stood a monolith 10 feet tall, pulsing with light, not glowing exactly, but shimmering in rhythm with the hum beneath their feet. They stepped closer, weapons lowered, as if any sudden move might awaken something ancient. The monolith was covered in symbols most unrecognizable, but a few matched the ones from Elias Dawes' journals. Claire ran her hand near it, but didn't touch. Brooks circled to the other side. "There's something inside," he said, pointing to a transparent segment pulsing faster than the rest. They leaned in. There, suspended behind the surface, was a shape, human, faint, like a figure, frozen in glass, not dead, not alive. A girl, her face calm, eyes closed. Claire gasped. "That's Emily Parker," Whitmer swore under his breath. "She's one of the first who went missing." Claire turned to the monolith. "It's storing them, holding them." Brooks stepped back, stunned. "Then the system. It doesn't destroy them. It absorbs them." "Why?" Claire looked around the chamber. "It's collecting them for something, building energy there. Part of it now." More figures emerged behind the shifting layers, others who had vanished. 23 in total. "What happens when it's done?" Whitmer asked. Claire didn't answer, because behind them, the tunnel began to pulse, slowly, steadily, as if sensing that its sequence was almost complete. And then the monolith spoke, not in language, but in vibration, a pulse of information that surged through the air, through their bones. Every one of them heard the same message, in their own minds. Pattern complete. Final subject acquired. Gate opening. Claire staggered backward. "Final subject, ... double quotes," she whispered. Her blood ran cold. The spiral didn't just end at her. House, it ended with her. Brooks grabbed her arm. "We need to go, now." The air behind them had begun to bend, not visually, but spatially. The tunnel no longer led where it once had. The system was folding the space around itself, creating something, maybe an exit, or something far worse. Claire turned back to the monolith one last time. "If we leave now, it opens," she said. "We don't know what that means, but we do know what it's taking. People, places, power." Whitmer stared at the shifting walls. "And if we stay?" Claire didn't respond, because the hum was louder now, because the monolith was waiting, because Mill Creek's silence had never then just silence. It had been the sound of something listening. The tunnel behind them pulsed again, this time with force. A deep thrum rolled through the walls, shifting dust and sending a ripple across the floor like breath through lungs. Brooks stumbled, catching himself on the curved wall of the chamber. "It's activating something," he said. "This whole place, it's not dormant, it's waiting." Claire stood rooted, eyes still locked on the monolith. The suspended figures inside hadn't changed, still frozen mid-motion, but the shimmer around them had started to pulse in time with the floor beneath her. A living circuit, a system gathering momentum. Whitmer moved to the tunnel entrance. "We need to seal this place." Claire turned sharply. "With what?" "You saw that entrance. You think boards or concrete are going to stop something that can tunnel through solid ground without leaving a trace?" Whitmer exhaled slowly. "Then we cut the spiral, break the last point." Brooks frowned. "You mean Claire?" The words hung heavy in the air. Claire felt her chest tighten. "That's what it wants. The pattern ends with me. It's not random." She stepped toward the monolith, her voice quiet but steady. "If it takes me, it completes the loop. If I leave, maybe it doesn't." Whitmer's jaw clenched. "I'm not losing you, too." Suddenly, the walls flared with pulses of light, not bright, but synchronized in rows, like a countdown. The hum deepened into something more layered, with metallic clicking and the rhythmic sound of something winding up. The monolith vibrated. One of the transparent panels at the base shimmered, then split open, revealing a small chamber, just large. Enough for a person. Inside, the shape of a chair, or something like one. Claire stepped back, eyes wide. "It's offering a seat." Brooks moved to block her. "That's not an invitation, that's a trap." But Claire's mind was already spinning. The system wasn't forcing them, it was inviting. The spiral didn't just capture, it chose. Whitmer's radio crackled violently, with static, not words, but a repeated tone, short, long. Claire froze. "Morse," she muttered. Brooks raised a brow. "For what?" She stared at the rhythm. SOS, the system was sending a distress call. Not to them, to somewhere else. "If this opens," Claire said, pointing to the monolith, "it's not the end. It's a signal, a message. Everything we've seen, the disappearances, the dreams, the electromagnetic pulses, they're just preparation. It's been building power for something bigger." Whitmer looked to her. "Then, we can't let it finish." Claire stepped back to the chamber entrance. "We close the spiral. We interrupt the loop. We stop the signal from completing." Brooks grabbed her arm again. "How?" She pulled a device from her bag, a modified transmitter, something she'd been working on for days in secret. "By sending noise, misdirection, something the system can't process. Static in its pattern." She placed the transmitter on the floor, hardwired it to the seismic monitor from her backpack, and armed it. 5 minutes. When it hits full pulse, it sends a reverse signal through every layer of its frequency. She looked up. "It'll hurt, but it'll scramble the end of the cycle." They turned to leave, but as they reached the threshold of the tunnel, the system reacted. The hum spiked, the floor vibrated, and from the walls, for the first time, came motion not from behind the metal, but inside it. A shape pressed forward. From within, human-like, featureless, like the outline of something still forming. Claire's voice trembled as she whispered, "It's not just energy, it's becoming." And the transmitter behind her had already begun to pulse. The pulse from the transmitter began to build. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint buzz, like background static. But within 30 seconds, it had become impossible to ignore. It layered itself over the hum of the system like a discordant note, jarring and uncomfortable. The walls of the chamber reacted immediately. What had once been smooth and solid began to ripple. The light dimmed, flickered, and then surged violently. The monolith flared in protest, sending a sharp vibration through the floor that dropped Whitmer to his knees. Claire clutched the transmitter's receiver tightly. "It's fighting back," she said through gritted teeth. "Good, that means it's working." Brooks reached for his cum, but it let out a shrill screech and died. The monolith's interior, the place where the suspended bodies had floated, began to distort. The images shifted, fragmented, like a corrupted file. The faces inside flickered between calm and pained. Some turned to face Claire. Others dissolved into pure light. "It's destabilizing them," Brooks said, horrified. "They're not just stored, they're interwoven." Claire's heart clenched. If this worked, she might save the town, but not the ones already taken. The system had converted them into power, form, structure. "We may not be able to pull them back," she whispered, "but we can stop it from taking more." Then the monolith shifted. For the first time, it moved. Not rising or collapsing, but rotating slowly, as if aligning itself with something unseen. The chamber dimmed. The air grew thick. One wall of the tunnel closed behind them, cutting off their path. "It's locking us in," Whitmer said, standing with effort. Claire glanced at the transmitter. The countdown flashed red. 2 minutes. We stay. We hold the signal until it loops. Then we run. Don't break the pattern. Brooks shook his head. "How do we know it'll let us out?" Claire didn't answer. She wasn't sure it would. The figure in the wall, the one that had first pressed forward, was now almost fully formed. Still faceless, but shaped like a person. Its limbs long, symmetrical. Its chest moved, as if breathing. The surface around, it cracked slightly, then healed. "It's trying to manifest," Claire said. "It needs a final sequence, a final piece." The monolith rotated again. From deep within its base, a second chamber began to open. Empty, waiting. "It's waiting for you," Brooke said, stepping between her and the new opening. "Don't go near it." But Claire already knew the answer. "I don't think it wants me physically. I think it wants my signal, my presence." That last piece of the spiral. Suddenly, the transmitter surged. The hum across the chamber collapsed into static. Everything pulsed. Light poured from the walls. The figure in the wall began to unravel, its limbs breaking into geometric shards of light. The monolith stuttered. The floor beneath them lurched, not from below, but from within. The system was breaking, not violently, but like something waking up too fast. A voice filled the chamber again. Not English, not words, just tone, echoing through every nerve in Claire's body. "Hold it," she said, jaw clenched. "One more minute," and then the shimmer around them fractured. The shimmer collapsed with a sound that wasn't quite noise, more like the air snapping into a new shape. The walls of the chamber didn't explode. They fractured inward, collapsing like reflections in broken glass. For a single, staggering moment, Claire saw everything. The tunnels beneath Mill Creek like veins, the monolith as a node in a vast and buried engine, and the figures inside it not trapped but converted. Each person who vanished had been encoded into the system, not bodies, blueprints. The system wasn't just feeding, it was copying, learning. The pulse from Claire's transmitter peaked. The countdown hit 0. A blast of sound rippled out in all directions, raw, metallic, untuned. A screech of static that folded over itself, then inverted. The light inside the monolith dimmed, then blinked out entirely. One by one, the glowing circuits along the walls turned black. The shimmering panel shut. The figure in the wall unraveled into dust, disassembled by the static wave. Claire gasped for breath as the chamber's pressure dropped suddenly. The air felt thin, metallic. The floor vibrated once, weakly, then went still. The hum was gone. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, there was silence. Real silence. Whitmer stood, trembling. "Did it work?" he whispered. Claire couldn't answer. Not yet. She walked to the monolith now, a dull, solid block. She reached out. Cold. No. More warmth. No more pulse. Just dead surface. The chamber felt smaller now. The system had shut down, or maybe it had collapsed inward, like a wave retreating into itself. It didn't want energy, she said slowly. It wanted design. It was gathering people to build something else. Something it couldn't be without us. Brooks leaned on the tunnel wall, staring into the place where the secondary chamber had once stood. So, it was never going to kill anyone. It was going to become them. The figures in the monolith had vanished, not even shadows remained. But the sense of presence still lingered, like static in an old radio. Claire stepped back and picked up the transmitter. It was fried, melted slightly along one edge. The signal unit fused. It had done its job, but it had no power left. "We bought time," she said quietly. "That's all." Whitmer nodded. "Then we get out. Bury this place, every entrance, every map. Make sure no one ever finds it again." Brooks remained silent as they climbed. The tunnel was still dark, but the pressure was gone. The air felt like it belonged to them again. Back outside, dawn was just beginning to break. The town below looked unchanged, quiet, small, unaware. But Claire could feel it. Something in the silence had shifted, a ripple in the current. She stared at the horizon, then glanced back once at the tunnel mouth. No sound, no light, no hum. But she knew what they'd just done wasn't the end. They had interrupted a cycle, not destroyed it. Whatever the system had been trying to finish, it would try again. Whitmer closed the tunnel entrance with a controlled blast an hour later. The ground collapsed into itself, sealed and marked as unstable. No one would go near it again, not without knowing what they were walking into. Back in her home, Claire sat alone and opened the last page of Elié's Door's final journal. A phrase had appeared there, written faintly in pencil, something she hadn't seen before. When it resets, it remembers the one who interrupted it. The quiet in Mill Creek after the collapse wasn't peace, it was something heavier. The kind of silence that lingers after the sound of something too big to name. Nothing had visibly changed. The streets still curved the same way. The traffic lights blinked in rhythm, and the same wind rustled through the trees at dusk. But the town was holding its breath. It wasn't over, not really. The people who vanished hadn't come back. There were no joyous reunions, no miracles, just empty chairs at dinner tables, cold pillows, unopened text messages. The system had stopped or paused, but its absence left a shape, and that shape was still here. Claire tried to return to her old routines. She made coffee in the morning, read through unread emails, walked her neighborhood at night. But everywhere she looked, reminders stared back. At the post office bulletin board, the missing persons flyers still fluttered all 23 faces. smiling from photographs that already looked like they belonged to a different time. The high school band room remained locked. So did the front office of the local bakery. On the side of one brick wall downtown, someone had chalked, "We saw it. Don't pretend we didn't." The rain had tried to wash it away, but the outline stayed, like the system's own fingerprint, left behind in reverse. Whitmer had grown quieter since the tunnel. He never spoke of it, not to Claire, not in his reports. They both knew better than to write what really happened. So the official version became something safe, a geological anomaly beneath the northern ridge, now sealed for public safety. There were no mentions of spirals, no maps, no transmitters, no monolith. Claire filed her own documentation in a fireproof lockbox and buried it beneath the floorboards of the old records room, under shelves no one had touched in years. She didn't seal it. If someone ever needed it again, she wanted them to find it, because something told her this wasn't the end, only a delay. And yet, life tried to move forward. Parents resumed walking their kids to school, though their eyes scanned the sky. Porch lights stayed on later. Dogs barked more often. And at precisely for 11 a.m. each night, a few residents, the ones who'd heard the hum, still found themselves wide awake, holding their breath without knowing why. Claire was one of them. She never set an alarm. She never meant to wake up. But every night, at the same time, her eyes opened in the dark and she listened. Not for noise, for the return of absence. One evening, Claire stood on the back porch of her house and watched the trees beyond her lawn. The grass where the last arc of the spiral had passed had finally regrown, but she could still see where it had been. A faint depression, a memory in the dirt. The wind stirred the leaves, soft and slow, and then she heard it. Not the hum, not the voice, just a single click, barely there, mechanical, cold, familiar. She didn't move, didn't blink, and in that one breathless moment, she understood. Something she hadn't let herself believe. Whatever it was, it had seen her, and it was waiting. Claire didn't speak of the click, not to Whitmer, not to Brooks. She barely trusted herself to say it aloud. Maybe it had been nothing, a settling pipe, a shifting branch. That's what she told herself. But deep down, she knew better. The click had weight. It hadn't belonged to her world. It came from a pattern, one that hadn't fully stopped. Only paused. The system, the spiral, the impossible machinery beneath the town. Whatever name she gave it, it hadn't been erased. It had retreated. And now, maybe, it was testing the air again, listening, checking if it was safe to begin again. The next day, Claire drove to the ridge alone. The tunnel site was still sealed, earth-packed and hardened by sun and rain. No cracks, no signs of disturbance. And yet, standing there, she could feel the low pressure she'd come to recognize. Not a vibration, not sound, just tension in the air. As if gravity itself was being pulled slightly sideways. She walked the perimeter twice, checked the soil. It looked normal, but so had everything before. That's what made the system dangerous. It didn't erupt. It didn't announce itself. It crept in through the circuits, through silence, through the things people weren't paying attention to. Claire returned to town and quietly checked in with a few of the people who'd been most affected. June Holloway, who still kept a nightly dream log from her students. Vera Langley, the woman whose brother had disappeared in 1973, and Jeff Hollow, whose yard had revealed the second metal line. They all said the same thing, in their own words. It feels quiet again, but not peaceful. Jeff even added, it's The same kind of quiet I heard the night before my clocks stopped. June said one of her students, a girl named Hallie, had woken up crying at exactly 4:11 a.m. 2 nights in a row, saying she heard a train with no horn. Claire listened to it all and made notes in the back of her journal. The pattern was returning, only slower this time. Testing, waiting. That evening, the town experienced a brief power flicker. It lasted only 1 second, the kind of blink that would normally be shrugged off. But Claire saw the pattern. It occurred precisely at 4:11 a.m. Not for 10, not for 12. Exactly, she drove to the municipal grid office and checked the activity logs herself. The spike came from an unregistered surge, nothing the techs could trace. No line break, no substation error, just ... an insertion, a pulse, ghost signal, one of the techs joked. But Claire knew there were no ghosts here, only systems, ones that remember their last loop. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood again at her back porch and stared into the trees. This time, there was no click, no hum, but the porch light flickered once, faint and unsure, like something knocking gently on the edge of presence. Claire whispered under her breath, "Not yet. You don't get to come back yet." The wind didn't answer. But in the deep hush of early morning, she felt it again, that sensation of being watched, not from outside, but from underneath. Something wasn't just returning. It had never really left. July 3rd came quietly. No alarms, no police briefings, no mass panic. The only people who knew what to look for were the ones who had already stopped sleeping. Claire, Whitmer, a few quiet others. They didn't speak to each other that day. They didn't have to. They just waited for the hum, for the flicker, for the moment when the line between memory and presence blurred again. But the town moved. Unlike nothing had ever happened. Kids rode their bikes. The mayor waved from the sidewalk, and Claire sat on her porch with a mug of cold coffee, watching the air at exactly 4:11 a.m. on July 4th. Claire's radio whispered to life, just static at first. Then a single phrase, garbled and distant, sequence incomplete. No voice, just tone, mechanical, indifferent. Then silence, no flicker, no click, just a drop in temperature that lasted less than 5 seconds, not enough to be felt by anyone else. But Claire noticed. She always did. She whispered to the dark, "You tried." But she didn't say it with victory. She said it with understanding. Because what she'd begun to realize, maybe too late, was that the system wasn't hunting. It wasn't malicious. It was doing what it was designed to do: connect, learn, build. She walked the town for the last time that day, tracing the original arc with her own steps. Every house, every yard, every mark from the past few weeks. The metal lines had gone quiet, their heat faded. No new anomalies, no missing people. But there was something else. A feeling in the town itself, not dread, but ... latency, like a song paused mid. The hum hadn't vanished. It had moved. She no longer felt it beneath her home. But at the edge of town, where the spiral had first begun, there was a new kind of stillness. Not dangerous yet, but not dormant either. On the morning of July 5th, Claire packed her bags. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. She left a sealed folder on Whitmer's desk, marked in case of pulse. Inside were maps, photos, audio logs, Elia Store's final notebook, and her own recordings. On the last page, she'd written, "You can't kill something designed to wait, but you can outlast it. If it listens, it learns. So don't give it anything new to hear." She drove away without looking back, and Mill Creek stayed quiet until years later, in a town 2 states away, the lights began flickering at 4:11 a.m. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Storiosity, and share your favorite moment of this story in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.